Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind howled across the dry grasslands outside of Casper, and the smokehouse door slammed shut with a heavy wooden bar, locking her in. Rhetta Kline pressed her back to the wall, heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with salt-cured meat and the sour sting of old smoke. Her wrists were raw from fighting her father's grip, but fighting had only gotten her here, locked in a shed like an animal, her voice ignored, her future decided without her. She was 21 now, a grown woman, but that didn't mean a thing to her father. Not when he had already promised her hand to a man twice her age in exchange for 3 head of cattle and a crate of ammunition. The days had turned colder. She pulled her shawl tighter and sat on an overturned barrel, her breath curling in front of her in the dark. She did not cry. She had done that the first night. Now she sat quiet, listening for footsteps, for anything beyond the moan of wind and the creak of the old boards. She had no way of knowing how many days had passed. Her father shoved in food once a day, never speaking, never meeting her eyes. And then, on the 4th morning, she thought it was the 4th, a voice called out beyond the barn. "Where's Rhetta?" It was low and steady, and it cut through the wind like a blade. Rhetta stood up fast, knocking the barrel over. She pressed her palms to the door. Someone was here. Someone who knew her name. Her father's voice came next, louder, rough. "She ain't here. You can ride on." The man didn't leave. "I was told she was promised to Carter Blevins." But promises don't mean much when they're made with fists and threats. That name made Rhetta's stomach turn. Carter Blevins had come sniffing around for months now, grinning like he was owed something. "She's coming with me," the man said. Rhetta's heart slammed in her chest. "No, she ain't," her father snapped. "Open the damn door, Walter," the stranger said, "or I swear I'll break it." There was a pause, then boots stomping toward the smokehouse. The bar lifted, the hinges groaned open, and light spilled in. Rhetta blinked hard against it. She saw her father's scowl first, then the tall figure behind him. Dusty hat, a worn duster, sharp eyes beneath the brim. "Get out here," her father growled. The stranger moved before she could even step. He came forward, gently taking her arm. "You all right?" he asked, voice quiet now. She nodded. Yes." Her father reached for her shoulder, but the cowboy shifted fast, stepping between them. "You touch her again," he said, "and I'll put you on the ground." "You got no right," Walter spat. "I got all the right I need," the man said. "You lost your say the moment you locked her up." Rhetta looked up at him, at the hard line of his jaw, the steady hand still holding her arm. He was younger than she expected, maybe 25, 26. Dust clung to his coat, and his boots were scuffed from long riding. She stepped out beside him. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked down at her, eyes softening. "Wesley Kane." Her throat tightened. "Why? Why did you come?" He hesitated. "Because I heard what he did, and because you don't belong in a cage." Walter lunged forward, but Wesley turned fast, drawing his revolver, but not raising it, just showing it. Her father froze. "I ain't here to kill you, old man," Wesley said. "But she's leaving. Right now." Walter's face twisted with rage, but he didn't move again. Wesley turned to Rhetta. "Come on." She clutched her shawl tighter and followed him without looking back. She did not want to see her father's eyes. She had stared into them her whole life and never once found love there. Wesley led her to his horse, a tall chestnut mare, and helped her up before swinging up behind her. His arms bracketed her body, one hand holding the reins, the other steady at her waist. "Where are we going?" she asked. "North," he said. "There's a widow in Buffalo who takes in folks with nowhere to go. You can rest there, eat, figure out your next step." She was quiet for a long time, the wind cutting against her cheeks. His coat blocked most of it. He was warm behind her, his arm firm and sure. "Why did you really come?" she asked, voice small. He exhaled. "Because someone had to." They rode through the day, stopping only when the sun dipped low and the wind turned sharp. Wesley built a fire near a bend in the creek, close enough for warmth but hidden from the road. He gave her the blanket from his saddle roll and handed her a tin of beans warmed over the flame. "You always ride around saving women from smokehouses?" she asked, her voice lighter now. He chuckled once. "No, just this one." She glanced at him, surprised by the softness in his face. "You did not even know me." "I knew enough." She stared at the fire, feeling the heat on her cheeks. "I thought I was going to die in there," she admitted. I thought he would leave me until I agreed to marry Blevins. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You are never going back. She believed him. That night, Rhetta lay wrapped in her blanket while Wesley kept watch beside the fire. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the way he stared into the flames, the way his hand rested near his revolver but never twitched. He had risked a lot for her, and she did not even know why. In the quiet, her voice reached him. Why did you come, Wesley? Truly. He looked at her, eyes shadowed by the firelight. Because I heard what your father did, and I could not sleep after that. And because I remembered you. She blinked. You remembered me? You were 12. I was 16. My father traded horses with yours. I saw you watching from the porch. You smiled at me just once. She stared at him, memory rushing in. A gangly boy with sunburned cheeks and a crooked grin. I remember, she whispered. He smiled faintly. I never forgot. She lay back on the ground, heart thudding. She was not just a woman he rescued. He had remembered her all this time. She turned toward the stars, a smile tugging at her mouth. For the first time in years, she felt something bloom in her chest that was not fear. Hope, real and steady. And Wesley Kane. By the time they reached Buffalo, the snow had started to stick. The town sat low and quiet under a gray sky, smoke curling from chimneys, the streets slushed with half-frozen mud. Wesley guided the mare around puddles, nodding at a few shopkeepers who paused to watch them pass. Rhetta sat straight behind him, her hands folded in her lap, face pale with cold but eyes fixed ahead. They stopped near the edge of town, at a cabin with a red-painted door and muslin curtains drawn back from the windows. A woman stepped out before Wesley could knock, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, her apron dusted with flour. You're late, she said, wiping her hands on the apron. Wesley dismounted first. Snow slowed us. She looked Rhetta over with a sharp, assessing glance. She able to walk? I'm fine, Rhetta said before Wesley could answer. The woman nodded once. Good. I've got stew on. Come in before your toes snap off. Inside, the cabin smelled of onions and thyme. The fire crackled low, and every surface had the worn, polished look of long use. The woman handed Rhetta a wool shawl from a peg near the door. Name's Mavis, she said. You'll sleep in the back room. Wash basins there too. Don't track mud. Rhetta nodded, unsure what to say. Wesley stood near the hearth, coat dripping. She needs rest. Maybe a few days. Mavis raised an eyebrow. You staying too? He hesitated, just long enough to see she's settled. That night, Rhetta lay beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and bread. The walls were thin enough to hear Mavis humming in the kitchen and the occasional creak of Wesley's boots on the floorboards. She didn't sleep much. Her body was safe now, but her thoughts hadn't caught up. By morning, Mavis had set her to chopping carrots for the midday meal. You ever cooked for more than yourself? The older woman asked, handing her a bowl. No, Rhetta said, but I'm quick to learn. Mavis nodded, then turned toward Wesley, who leaned against the doorframe with a mug in hand. She's got good hands. Steady. I know, he said. When Mavis stepped out to fetch eggs from the coop, Rhetta wiped her palms on her skirt and glanced toward him. You trust her? With my life. Rhetta set the knife down. Why? He stared into the steam rising from his mug. She nursed my mother through her last days. Wouldn't take a cent. Just said no one should die alone. Rhetta looked down at the pale wedge of carrot she'd been slicing. You never said your mother passed. She did. 2 winters ago. I'm sorry. He gave a slight nod, then glanced toward the window. You're free now? That's what matters. She folded her arms. And what does a woman do with freedom she's never had? He met her gaze. Whatever she's strong enough to reach for. They didn't speak again until the stew was done and the table set. Mavis ladled out bowls, and the 3 of them ate in a quiet that wasn't unfriendly. That afternoon, Rhetta helped mend a torn curtain while Wesley chopped wood outside. She watched him through the glass, his sleeves rolled, his shoulders moving with the rhythm of the axe. He worked without rush, without noise. When he came in, snow dusted his hair and shoulders. Storm's coming, he said. Mavis nodded. You'll stay in the loft tonight. Wesley glanced at Rhetta, then back to Mavis. Only if there's room. There's always room for good hands and quiet mouths. You'll sleep above the pantry. That evening, after Mavis retired to her room, Rhetta stood by the fire with a cup of warm milk. Wesley knelt nearby, adjusting the logs. Shadows flickered across the walls. She spoke softly. You remembered a 12-year-old girl on a porch. What else do you recall? He didn't look up. You had a yellow ribbon in your hair. You were barefoot, even though the ground was half frozen. And you waved. She sipped the milk. You didn't wave back. I wanted to. My father didn't hold with boys showing softness. She crouched beside him, holding her hands toward the heat. Did you come looking for me, Wesley? Or did you just stumble across my name? He stared into the fire. A man in Casper mentioned a girl being locked away. Said no one would cross Walter Kline. I asked her name. When he said yours, I saddled my horse. Rhetta's throat tightened. You risked a lot. I didn't weigh the risk. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Finally, she said, I don't know what I'll do next. You don't have to know. Just keep going. One day at a time. She looked at him, really looked. The lines beside his eyes, the way his jaw moved when he swallowed. He wasn't just kind. He was steady. I'd like to ride again. When the storm passes. I'll take you wherever you want to go. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. And there was something in the air between them, then not sudden, not sharp, but steady and rising like spring water after a long frost. Not a promise. Not yet, but the beginning of one. The snow came heavier than expected, blanketing the hills beyond town and sealing the roads in both directions. No one left Buffalo for 5 days. The wind rattled shutters and bent the trees near sideways, but Mavis's cabin held firm, its walls thick with years of winters past. Each day, Rhetta rose early and folded the quilt by habit. She helped Mavis with the butter churn and sorted beans by lantern light when the sun stayed hidden. Her hands stayed busy, but her thoughts drifted. Not to the smokehouse she'd locked that door in her mind, but to the barn behind Mavis's house, where Wesley spent most of his daylight hours tending to the mare and hauling hay from the loft. One morning, she found him there, sleeves rolled, brushing down the horse's winter coat. You always this quiet when you work? She asked, stepping inside. He didn't turn. I talk plenty, just not when there's no reason. She leaned against the stall post. I'm not asking for talk's sake. He laid the brush aside and looked at her. No. I suppose you aren't. She stepped closer, the straw soft beneath her boots. I've been thinking, she said. My mother's sister had a dry goods store near Sheridan. I only met her once, but I remember her smile. I think she might take me in. Wesley nodded slowly. That's a good thought. I'd need a wagon, a guide through the pass, someone who knows the road. He met her eyes. You'd have both. She searched his face. You'd ride all that way for me? I'd ride further. A silence stretched between them, not heavy, just full. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. Not even when I sit too long by the fire and forget how to speak. He stepped around the mare, wiping his hands on a cloth. I've seen what a burden looks like, Rhetta. You're not it. She watched him for a long beat, then looked away. I can't offer much, she said. No money, no land, just myself. Wesley leaned on the stall gate, the wood creaking under his weight. That's worth more than any of the rest. She smiled, faint and steady, and left the barn. That night, the storm broke. The wind settled, snow piled high against the porch rail. Mavis brewed peppermint tea and set out a loaf of molasses bread. After supper, Wesley sat near the hearth, whittling a sliver of pine. Rhetta watched the flick of his knife, the wood curling away in ribbons. What are you making? She asked. He didn't look up. Figure I'll know when it's done. It looks like a sparrow, she said, tilting her head. He glanced at it, then back to her. Maybe you're right. She settled beside him on the floor, her skirt brushing the edge of the rug. Did you have anyone before? She asked. A sweetheart. He paused, knife stilling. Once, when I was 19, she married a shopkeeper in Rollins. Rhetta nodded. You? She shook her head. Never had the chance. My father made sure of that. They sat in easy quiet for a time, the fire low, the cabin warm. I don't want to leave here without knowing what you want, she said. He set the carving down. I want to be with someone who sees me clear, not just what I can carry or fix. She turned fully toward him. And do you think I see you? I know you do. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. I want you to come to Sheridan with me, she said. His jaw moved once, like he was steadying something inside. You sure? I'm sure. He reached out, slow and certain, and took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm. I'll ride wherever you ask, he said. She nodded once, her other hand covering his. In the loft above the pantry, Wesley lay awake long after the fire died. Below, Rhetta slept with her hand curled near her face, the quilt rising and falling with each breath. The snow had stopped. The world was quiet. Outside, the stars returned. Inside, something new took root, a promise not spoken, but understood. The road to Sheridan opened slowly, a ribbon of thawed dirt winding between low hills and stands of bare cottonwoods. Mavis packed them a basket of oatcakes and dried venison, and Rhetta tucked the carved sparrow into her satchel without needing to explain. Wesley saw it and gave a quiet nod, and that was all the speaking they did about what passed between them. They left just after sunrise, Wesley driving the wagon and Rhetta beside him under a woolen shawl, her hands resting on the edge of her skirt. The mare pulled steady, hooves muffled in patches of old snow. Midway through the second day, they passed a burned-out homestead, roof collapsed, the chimney still upright like a marker stone. Rhetta turned her face toward it, then looked to the road again. "Did you ever lose your home?" she asked, her voice low. Wesley kept his eyes ahead. "Once. Fire took the roof while we were in town. Nothing left but the stove and a horseshoe nailed to the beam." She studied his profile. "What did you do after?" "Built another. Smaller. Took time." He glanced at her. "You? My mother died when I was 9. I used to think the house turned colder after." Not from the wind, from what he carried in his voice. Wesley didn't speak for a long stretch. Then, "Some men carry cold like it's armor. Never learn how to set it down." She nodded, slow. "I don't want to be afraid of walls anymore." He shifted the reins in one hand, the other resting near hers. "Then we'll build something different." They made camp that night near a bend in the creek, where the water still ran dark beneath a thin crust of ice. Rhetta gathered kindling while Wesley saw to the mare. He laid out the blankets near the fire, and she sat cross-legged, warming her fingers. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "You think your aunt will welcome you?" "She might. She was kinder than the rest. Sent a box of ribbons once, when I turned 15. My father burned them." Wesley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Rhetta sipped, then looked into the flames. "If she says no, I'll find work. I can stitch. I can read." "You won't be alone," he said. She looked up. "You mean to stay?" "I do." She studied the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he didn't flinch under the weight of her gaze. "Why? I've seen men walk away from things worth holding. I don't aim to be one of them." She set her cup down. "You don't say much unless it matters." He gave a faint smile. "Wastes less breath that way." They lay on opposite sides of the fire that night, but the space between them felt smaller than it had before. She fell asleep to the rhythm of the creek and the wind in the grass, and when she woke before dawn, she found him already tending the coals, coaxing them back to life. They reached Sheridan by mid-afternoon, the town spread low and wide beneath the bighorns. It was quieter than Buffalo, though the sawmill clattered steady in the distance. Wesley pulled the wagon in beside a livery, and Rhetta stepped down, smoothing her skirt. The dry goods store sat near the edge of town, its windows clean and a row of pickled jars lined up behind the glass. Rhetta hesitated on the step. "If she turns me away, I don't want you to speak for me," she said. Wesley met her eyes. "I won't take your voice. I'm just here to stand beside you." She nodded, then squared her shoulders and pushed through the door. When she came back out, her cheeks were damp, but her jaw was steady. "She remembers me," she said. Said I've got her mother's chin. She looked up at him. "She has a room. Said it's mine if I want it." He didn't touch her, just stood quiet, waiting. "I told her I'll stay," she said. "But not alone." Wesley's shoulders eased, though he hadn't known they were tight. She stepped closer. "If you want to build something with me, something that isn't made of fear or silence, I want that too." He reached for her hand, not quick, not hesitant either. "Then we start here." She laced her fingers through his, warm and certain. The wind tugged at the edge of her shawl as they stood on the porch, the sun slipping low behind the town. Whatever came next, they would build it with their own hands. Not out of luck or rescue, but out of choice. And that choice, firm, quiet, and shared, was the strongest thing either of them had ever carried. The rhythm of days in Sheridan steadied like a heartbeat. Rhetta took to the store's back room with quiet diligence, sorting ledgers for her aunt and folding bolts of calico with precise corners. She wore her hair tucked in a loose twist, now sensible, but still soft at the edges. Her aunt, Helen, gave her space without asking questions, though she sometimes paused in the doorway to watch Rhetta with a look that held both memory and apology. Wesley hired on at the blacksmith's yard 2 streets over, his hands quick with iron and leather. He lived in a room above the livery, plain but dry, and each evening he walked to the store just past closing, his boots leaving no more than a whisper on the packed dirt. One evening, Rhetta came out to find him waiting beneath the overhang, the sky rinsed in pale lavender. "I was thinking," he said, offering his arm, "that you've been working too hard to see much of this town." She laced her hand into the crook of his elbow. "What's worth seeing?" He led her down the boardwalk toward the creek, where the wild grasses still rustled under their crust of frost. "There's a man who whittles spoons to trade for eggs. A woman who sings French lullabies to her goats. The world's still strange, even here." They walked past the last of the lantern-lit windows and into the hush of open land. Rhetta bent to pick a smooth pebble from the creek bank, turning it in her hand. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" she asked. He crouched to dip his fingers in the slow-moving water. "I used to, when I thought I had to outrun everything behind me." He looked up. "Now I think staying means something different." She studied him in the fading light, the strong slope of his shoulders, the way stillness suited him better than most. "I want a place of my own," she said. "Not just a room borrowed from blood." He nodded. "Then we'll find one. Doesn't have to be far. Just ours." Her breath caught not from surprise, but from the rightness of it. She pressed the stone into his palm. "Keep this," she said. "You'll know when the time's right to give it back." Wesley closed his fingers around it. The first day of spring came with a soft rain and the smell of thawed mud. Rhetta stepped into the store before opening and found her aunt standing by the door, holding a folded piece of paper. "This came last week," Helen said. "I waited to give it to you. Wasn't sure if you'd want it." Rhetta unfolded the letter. The handwriting was rough, the words halting. It was from a neighbor back in Casper, the one who used to sell apples near the rail yard. Walter Kline had taken ill. No one tended his land. No one came to his door. Rhetta folded the paper slowly and set it on the shelf beside the tea tins. "I'm not going back," she said. Helen didn't press. "You don't have to." Rhetta stepped outside into the rain, her shawl pulled tight, and walked to the smithy. Wesley looked up from the forge, face streaked with soot, and wiped his hands on his apron. She didn't speak at first, just stood there watching the steam rise from the stones. "I don't want to carry ghosts with me," she said. He set down the tongs. "Then don't. I want to build something clean." He nodded. "I've been saving. There's a plot east of town. Old trapper's cabin still standing. Needs a new roof." She stepped closer. "Let's go see it." They rode out that Sunday, just after church let out. The cabin sat in a shallow valley, its chimney leaning, the door hanging from one hinge. But the land was good flat enough for a garden, with a stand of aspen to the west and a stream that ran clear even in dry months. Rhetta stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and smiled. "It doesn't scare me," she said. Wesley reached into his coat and pressed the creek stone into her hand. "Then let's start." She nodded, and they began that very week. Wesley patched the roof with cedar shake while Rhetta whitewashed the walls. They bartered for a stove and built shelves from pine planks. Helen gifted a quilt stitched from her mother's old dresses. Mavis sent a jar of pickled beets with no note, just a strip of muslin tied around the lid. They married one quiet morning in June, beneath the aspen with only the wind and the birds to bear witness. No rings, just hands clasped and vows spoken clear. "I will not leave when things go quiet," Rhetta said. "I will stay when the fire burns low and when it burns too bright." "I will not lead unless you ask," Wesley said. "But I will walk beside you, from now until the end." They kissed with the sun warming their backs and no one else to watch. The cabin filled slowly. A rocking chair Wesley carved in the evenings. A row of glass jars Rhetta filled with preserves. A worn book of poetry they read aloud on cold nights. They planted potatoes that first year, and when the stalks pushed through the soil, Rhetta wept without shame. Their days were steady. Wesley rode into town for supplies and news. Rhetta stitched curtains from flour sacks and kept a diary in the drawer beside the bed. They touched hands over the table without needing words. In winter, when snow climbed the windows and the wind moaned like a lost thing, Wesley would build the fire high, and Rhetta would lean her head on his shoulder, both of them listening to the stove tick as it cooled. They did not speak often of the past. But sometimes, when the night was thick with stars and the only sound was the hush of breath and heartbeat, Rhetta would press her lips to Wesley's temple and whisper, "You found me." And he would answer, always the same, "I never stopped looking." They lived long. The cabin stood through blizzards and dry summers, through the birth of a son and the hard-won harvests that followed. They never left Wyoming. There was no need. They had already arrived, together,